to the national level. 12 years ago, when the Freight Mobility Board was created in Washington, it was the first time we focused as a state on the critical element of freight supporting our jobs and our economy. I'm pleased that the foresight to develop the guidelines that are necessary to operate the program at the federal level will go forward before there are even any funds. You can get a lot more agreement on what the right way is to do things before there are dollars involved. It's the way we were created, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity at the federal level, and I praise Senator Cantwell for introducing this bill. For freight to move, we can't have any bottlenecks. Not at the port, not on our rail lines, and not on our highways. This legislation would look at the entire system and get rid of all the problems and help move freight efficiently and include partnerships, partners with local governments, state governments, the private sector, the ports, and hopefully other industries that understand the importance of moving their product and what it does to the cost of their product if there isn't efficient movement. It's a collaborative engagement of everyone. The bill looks at continuing that collaborative engagement so that everyone is talking to one another. Certainly a lot of our freight moves on the private sector, and they need to be engaged in how we solve our problems of moving freight and keeping the United States competitive. This will be a merit-based program, and I can assure you here at the state level we are ready. Once they pass the legislation and put money, we will be the first ones knocking on the door. In the end, this also benefits the public. They may not understand how much freight benefits them, but every time they get a cup of coffee at Starbucks with the Indonesian coffee beans, or eat an Ecuadorian banana, or potatoes from Prosser, they're involved with freight mobility, and the cost of what they're buying is influenced by the transportation to get the product from the point A to point B. Again, my congratulations for your leadership. Thank you, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Karen. The railroads play a key role in moving goods. The Port of Tacoma was among the first to put rail right on our docks to speed up freight movement. I'd like to welcome Terry Finn, Director of Governmental Affairs for the BNSF Railway, one of the main railroads to serve our Washington ports. Terry, please.
You know, I think a practical way of looking at what Senator Cantwell has proposed in the legislation, and we thank her very much, is pretty soon most of it will be headed out to I-5, and points north, points south, and you'll be in a better than average chance you'll get in a huge traffic jam, whatever direction you go. And what this bill tries to do is lift freight transportation out of the whole mess, if you will, of transportation, and try to establish a singular viewpoint on freight that helps make it more efficient, because not only will it be difficult for you to get to your homes and places you're headed for the weekend, pretty soon without real concentration on how freight moves around our country, and particularly out of our port system here in the Northwest, pretty soon might not have jobs to go to either. So I think that's what we're worried about here. Rail has been one of the mainstay connections between the Northwest and main markets in the Midwest and the East. This bill addresses rail as well as port infrastructure and as well as highway infrastructure. We're very thankful to have that forum. We're very thankful that we're going to take a more strategic look at the national level and help and hopefully develop a national freight plan, which this bill also encompasses, to move forward on this. As I said in an earlier meeting with Senator Cantwell, one of the claims to fame here in the Northwest stems from the early days with our great deep water ports and our port system. It used to be known as the silk trains that delivered fresh cargoes of silk to Chicago and New York, and they became very, very fast. And there are still some of the speed records overland from those old days that haven't even been broken today, even with more modern equipment. And that's what we need to think about, again, about how fast and how reliably we can deliver goods. And I think that Senator Cantwell and the other co-sponsors in this legislation are thinking about that and trying to make it more of a national priority in the same way that the state of Washington tried to do a dozen years ago when it helped create the Freight Mobility Strategic Investment Group. So thank you, Senator. Really appreciate that, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Terry. Just for a moment, you probably have heard of the Washington Public Ports Association. All the ports in the state of Washington belong to the WPPA. And the job of the WPPA is to energize all the ports to try to act as a single unit, thus giving more influence behind the initiative that we're trying to back. And with us today, we forgot to introduce us, is Eric Johnson, who's the Executive Director of the WPPA. Eric? More than 1,500 longshore workers are strong partners in Tacoma, helping to keep our region's ports competitive. They really do a first-class job. It's my pleasure to introduce Scott Mason, President of ILW Local 23. Scott?
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Thank you, John. Thank you, Congressman or Senator Cantwell, for allowing me this opportunity to speak on this critical and historic legislation co-sponsored by Senator Murray. I want to start by stealing a comment I heard last week at the Puget Sound Regional Council Freight Mobility Roundtable discussion by Larry Eel of the state. While discussing the act, he said, and I quote, "This is a real great bill, more than just a good starting point." And I couldn't agree more. The Freight Act, when enacted, will be landmark legislation necessary to accomplish the ILWU's objectives well into the future. I'd like to address just a few points of this legislation and how it will affect longshoremen and working families. Preservation of current jobs and creation of new jobs, port development and improvement projects, and multimodal terminal projects are eligible under a merit-based system for funding. It's tremendous. We will be able to compete with the growing investments in Canada, Mexico, and the expansion of the Panama Canal. We'll develop and fund logical freight corridors based on the merits of the individual projects. Our jobs as longshoremen are private sector, well-paying jobs with good benefits that allow us to contribute to the betterment of our communities. We're a trained, skilled workforce that needs this Freight Act to make us more competitive in a global economy. Some of the fundamentals of this policy, this act that I really support is this health and safety issues involved. The act calls for the reduction of fatalities of 10% by 2015. In addition, it calls for the reduction of freight-related carbon dioxide levels by 40% by 2030. The Port of Seattle, the Port of Tacoma, have achieved great success in eliminating diesel particulates and implementing many environmental policies that further protect the health and safety of our workforce. I think what this act does also is it creates those types of initiatives that go outside of the reach of our direct port communities. And finally, I would like to also mention that the ILW is in strong support of President Obama's export initiative. And I think that this act will help achieve those goals of creating 2 million jobs in the next 5 years. Frankly, without this legislation, I think the task would be nearly impossible. The national freight policy will create good-paying manufacturing jobs. The agricultural base in this state and country is the nation's greatest hope to double exports in the next 5 years. I think we all know, at least here in Washington, that our farmers are being held back because of the lack of a national freight policy. Finally, I'd like to talk about the legislative process. I am particularly pleased that our delegation, with Senators Cantwell and Senators Murray co-sponsoring this legislation, and Adam Smith sponsoring this legislation in the House, it seems simple to me, although I was told earlier it may not be so simple, to achieve bipartisan support across the nation for this legislation. So Senator Cantwell, thank you again on behalf of the longshoremen of Tacoma, Seattle, and the other ports on the West Coast, and all the working men and working women and whose families will prosper as a result of the introduction and ultimate passage of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. It's now my pleasure to welcome our special guest today. We've been talking this afternoon about what it will take to keep our ports and the critical jobs associated with international trade competitive. Growth requires infrastructure capacity, and this freight legislation gives us a national framework to help direct strategic investments in transportation infrastructure to make sure capacity exists. Thank you, Senator Cantwell, for making this legislation a priority. Our region's trade-related jobs depend on it. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Senator Maria Cantwell.
Thank you all for being here today, and I especially want to thank the Port of Tacoma Commissioner Don Johnson and CEO John Wolf for hosting us here today, and obviously planning this beautiful weather. Each of you that are here today represents a vital part of our trade economy and infrastructure. Trade is the lifeblood of Washington's economy. However, the success of that vital trade economy depends on moving efficiently from farm to factory to port to customer a variety of products. Last year we exported over 51 billion worth of goods, making us first in the nation for exports per capita. According to the U.S. Department of Transportation, 9 Washington cities rank in the top 125 freight gateways handling international merchandise by air, land, and water. So of course everyone expects Seattle and Tacoma to be on the list, and they are, but everyone may not guess that Blaine, Kalama, Vancouver, Bellingham, Anacortes, Sumas, and other Washington ports are also on that list. And each has its own freight mobility challenges. For example, containers coming from Asia have to be moved to points east by train and truck and sometimes barge, but Washington's agricultural products, manufactured products, they rely on the same forms of transportation to ship their goods points west. And ports are the hubs of different modes of transportation. The demand for freight transportation parallels our nation's economy. And while our highest priority right now must be getting out of this economic ditch that we are in and moving forward, we need to be sure that we are looking at ways to help map that future through a better freight transportation mobility plan. The President has outlaid an ambitious goal in his National Export Initiative to double U.S. exports in the next 5 years. And in the long term, a national transportation freight demand is expected to double from what it is by the year 2050. So the potential for job growth here in Washington State and other places is great. But we need to have a national plan. So that's why I have introduced, along with my colleague Senator Murray and Senator Frank Lautenberg from New Jersey, the Freight Act. I'd like to outline some of its key points, but also to recognize this legislation is ultimately about more job creation here in Washington State and more job creation nationally. First, the Freight Act establishes goals and objectives for a national transportation freight policy. And many freight challenges relate to intermodal transportation. So successfully getting freight from one mode to another quickly and smoothly as possible must be able to be coordinated across various departments and various entities. For that reason, we are creating a Coordination and Planning and Development Office for the Secretary of Transportation. This office will coordinate our national efforts to increase efficiency in all components of freight, similarly what was done here in Washington State. That effort is what we are modeling the national plan on, and it created great levels of efficiency, thereby increasing the products that can be transported across our region. Third, the Freight Act will create a new cost-share competitive grant program supporting capital investments in freight mobility infrastructure, including ports, We all know from the ports behind us stories of how they could be more efficient, gain more customers if we improve this transportation infrastructure. And finally, the legislation gives the states the flexibility to direct existing federal transportation dollars towards investments in port infrastructure and upgrades in intermodal systems. Together, these provisions will ensure, I think, improved delivery of products and goods, reduce congestions and delays, and make transportation freight delivery more efficient, reducing its impacts on the environment and reducing freight-related transportation incidents. Another way to put it is if we were able to move more freight and move it more efficiently, we are going to have more jobs in Washington State and more jobs nationally. Washington State's trade-based economy needs to continue to thrive, and that's exactly what this legislation is trying to do. The Freight Act will put us on a 21st century road for transportation infrastructure. The bill will strengthen our economy with a more seamless transportation network to move more freight efficiently. I want to thank everyone here today behind me who has worked so hard at making this an efficient delivery system at the state level. Now we need to take that system to the national level and, of course, make sure that it's implemented so we can move more products and services and create more jobs. Thank you all for being here today.